A humble 9-year-old girl sees a man push her boss, a workaholic, wheelchair-bound millionaire, and says, "I can make Daddy walk again." He pales. Never knew he had a child. Before we dive in, this video is traveling across time zones right now. Share what season you're experiencing where you live. The autumn rain pelted against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Whitmore Industries' 42nd floor, creating rivulets that distorted the Chicago skyline beyond. Richard Whitmore sat motionless in his custom wheelchair, his steely grey eyes fixed on the quarterly reports scattered across his mahogany desk. At 55, he commanded a business empire worth $3 billion, yet the numbers before him might as well have been written in a foreign language. His mind wasn't on profit margins or market projections. It was on the email he'd received that morning, another rejection from the experimental treatment center in Switzerland. "We regret to inform you that you are not a candidate for our spinal cord regeneration program." The same words he'd heard from 17 different facilities over the past 3 years. "Mr. Whitmore?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your physical therapist is here." "Send him away," Richard growled, not looking up from his papers. "Cancel everything for today." The heavy oak doors burst open despite his instructions. Marcus Webb, his therapist, strode in with his usual determined expression. "That's not happening, Richard. You've missed 4 sessions this month. I said cancel. You can fire me if you want, but I'm not watching you give up." Marcus moved behind the wheelchair. "We're going to the gym." "Don't you dare touch!" But Marcus was already pushing the chair toward the door. Richard's hands shot to the wheels, trying to resist, but Marcus was stronger and more determined. "Let go of me!" Richard's voice echoed through the marble hallway as they passed startled employees. "I'll have security throw you out." "Good luck with that," Marcus replied, continuing to push despite Richard's protests. They were halfway to the elevator when it happened. A small voice, clear as crystal, cut through Richard's angry shouts. "Excuse me, mister. I can make Daddy walk again." Both men froze. Standing beside the reception desk was a little girl, no more than 9 years old. Her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her worn sneakers squeaked against the polished floor. She wore a faded blue dress that had clearly been mended several times, and she clutched a small brown paper bag that smelled faintly of cleaning supplies. The entire lobby fell silent. Employees stopped mid-stride, phones forgotten in their hands. "What did you say?" Richard's voice came out as barely a whisper. The girl stepped forward, her green eyes, so familiar, so achingly familiar, meeting his with unwavering confidence. "I said I can make you walk again, Daddy." The word hit Richard like a physical blow. His face drained of all color, and his hands began to tremble on the wheelchair's armrests. "Daddy?" he repeated, his voice cracking. "Mama told me all about you," the girl continued, seemingly unaware of the earthquake she'd just triggered. "She said you were the smartest, kindest man she ever knew. And she said that when I got big enough, I should come find you and tell you who I am." Marcus released his grip on the wheelchair, his mouth hanging open. Your mother," Richard managed to stammer. "What's her name?" "Sarah Collins. She cleans offices at night." The girl reached into her paper bag and pulled out a crumpled photograph. "She gave me this to show you." With shaking hands, Richard took the photo. It showed a woman he hadn't seen in 10 years. Sarah. Beautiful Sarah, with her bright smile and determined eyes. She was holding a baby with the same green eyes that now stared at him from across the lobby. "Emma," Richard whispered, reading the name written on the back of the photo. "Your name is Emma." The photograph trembled in Richard's hands as he stared at the little girl before him. Emma Collins, his daughter. The words seemed impossible. Yet the evidence stood right there, her green eyes so much like his own that denial was futile. "How did you get in here?" Marcus whispered, still in shock. "Mama brings me sometimes when she works late," Emma replied matter-of-factly. I know all the security guards. Mr. Peterson gave me juice boxes last week. Richard's mind raced back 10 years. Sarah Collins, a brief but intense relationship that had ended when his business consumed everything. She'd tried to tell him something important before she left, but he'd been too focused on a crucial merger to listen. The regret that had haunted him for years suddenly took on a devastating new dimension. Where is your mother now?" Richard's voice cracked. "At the hospital," Emma said, her small shoulders sagging. "She's been sick for 3 weeks. The doctors say she needs an operation, but we don't have enough money." The words hit Richard like a sledgehammer. While he'd been wallowing in self-pity about his paralyzed legs, his daughter had been watching her mother waste away because they couldn't afford medical care. "What kind of operation?" he asked urgently. "Something about her heart. The doctor used big words I couldn't understand." Emma's voice grew smaller. "But Mama said if I found you and told you the special thing, maybe you could help." "The special thing?" Emma nodded seriously. "She said you were hurt real bad and that God gave me a gift to help people walk again. She said I should tell you that love makes miracles happen, but only if you believe." The lobby had become a theater of stunned silence. Employees pretended to work while hanging on every word. Marcus knelt down beside Richard's chair, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Emma," Richard said gently, "how exactly do you think you can make me walk?" The little girl stepped closer, her hand reaching toward his. "Mama taught me. She said when two people love each other enough, and when someone believes real hard, God helps fix what's broken, but first you have to want to be fixed." For the first time in 3 years, Richard felt something stir in his chest. Not hope exactly, but something warmer than the cold emptiness that had consumed him. "Would you like to see your mama?" he asked. Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Could we? Really?" Richard turned to Marcus. "Cancel everything. We're going to Chicago General." Chicago General Hospital's sterile corridors echoed with the soft squeak of Richard's wheelchair wheels as Emma skipped alongside him, her small hand resting trustingly on his armrest. Marcus followed behind, still processing the morning's revelations. "She's in room 312, Emma announced, her voice carrying a mixture of excitement and worry. "The nurses are really nice, but they whisper a lot when they think I'm not listening." Richard's heart hammered against his ribs as they approached the elevator. 10 years since he'd seen Sarah. And now she was fighting for her life, while he'd been consumed with his own problems. The elevator ride felt eternal. When the doors finally opened on the 3rd floor, Emma immediately pulled him toward the cardiac wing. Her familiarity with the hospital's layout spoke volumes about how much time she'd spent here recently. "There!" Emma pointed to a partially open door. "That's Mama's room." Through the gap, Richard could see a figure lying motionless in the hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped rhythmically. Sarah, beautiful Sarah, looked so fragile, so different from the vibrant woman he remembered. "Mama's sleeping a lot now," Emma whispered. "But sometimes she wakes up and tells me stories about you." Richard steeled himself and pushed through the doorway. Sarah's eyes were closed, her face pale against the white pillows. She'd lost weight, and there were dark circles under her eyes, but she was still the same woman who had captivated him all those years ago. "Sarah," he said softly. Her eyelids fluttered open, and for a moment confusion clouded her features. Then recognition dawned, followed quickly by shock. "Richard?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Oh my God, Emma, what did you do?" "I told him about the special thing, just like you said," Emma replied proudly, climbing onto the chair beside the bed. "And I told him he's my daddy." Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she looked between her daughter and Richard. "I never meant. I thought you were too busy to care." "I was an idiot," Richard said simply. "Sarah, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you make me listen? You were building your empire. I was just a distraction. Sarah struggled to sit up straighter, but when I found out I was pregnant, I tried to reach you. Your secretary said you were in important meetings for weeks. The memory came flooding back. His assistant fielding calls from Sarah while he was consumed with the Peterson acquisition. He'd told her to handle it, never imagining what he was missing. I would have married you, he said quietly. I would have given up everything. I know that now, Sarah whispered, but I was young and proud. I thought I could raise her alone. Her voice broke. I wanted to give her everything, but I can barely give her anything. Emma suddenly perked up, looking between her parents with bright eyes. But now Daddy's here, and I can make him walk again, and then he can help take care of you, and we can be a real family. The innocence in her voice was heartbreaking. Richard reached out and took Sarah's hand, feeling how cold and fragile it was. What do the doctors say? He asked. Sarah's eyes clouded with fear. Mitral valve replacement. Without it. She glanced at Emma, unable to finish the sentence in front of their daughter. Consider it done, Richard said firmly. Whatever it costs, whoever we need to fly in, it's done. 2 days later, Richard found himself in an unfamiliar position, sitting in a hospital family lounge at 6 a.m., watching Emma color in a Disney princess book while they waited for Sarah's surgery to begin. He'd arranged for the finest cardiac surgeon on the East Coast to fly in, but the waiting was still excruciating. "Daddy," Emma said suddenly, not looking up from her coloring. "You haven't tried to walk yet." Richard shifted uncomfortably in his wheelchair. "Emma, sweetheart, it's not that simple. The doctors have run every test imaginable. My spinal cord was severely damaged in the car accident." "But did you ask God to help?" Emma's crayon paused mid-stroke. I haven't prayed in a very long time." Emma set down her crayon and climbed into his lap, something that surprised him with how natural it felt. "Mama says God hears all our prayers, even the quiet ones we think in our heads, and she says sometimes he waits for the right moment to answer them." Richard wrapped his arms around his daughter, marveling at how perfectly she fit against his chest. "What do you think the right moment is?" "When someone needs you to be strong for them," Emma said matter-of-factly. "Like right now, Mama needs you to be strong, and I need you to be strong, so maybe now is when God will help you walk." The logic was so pure, so innocent, that Richard found himself considering possibilities he'd long since abandoned. "Even if I could walk again, Emma, it would take time, lots of therapy, lots of hard work." "That's okay," Emma said, snuggling closer. "I'm good at waiting. And Mr. Marcus can help, right?" Marcus, who had been dozing in a nearby chair, opened his eyes at the mention of his name. "Help with what?" "Making Daddy walk again," Emma announced confidently. Marcus sat up straighter, studying Richard's face. In the past 2 days, he'd seen more life in Richard's eyes than in the previous 3 years combined. "You know what, Emma? I think you might be onto something." "You do?" Richard looked at his therapist with surprise. "I've been your therapist for 3 years, Richard. I've watched you go through the motions without any real hope or drive. But since Emma walked into your life..." Marcus paused thoughtfully. "The mind is more powerful than we give it credit for. Maybe what you needed wasn't another experimental treatment. Maybe you needed a reason to fight." Emma clapped her hands together. "See, I told you." Dr. Patricia Williams, Sarah's surgeon, appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Whitmore, we're ready to begin the procedure. It should take about 4 hours." Richard felt Emma tense in his arms. "Is Mama going to be okay?" she asked in a small voice. Dr. Williams smiled kindly. "I'm going to take very good care of her. And when she wakes up, she's going to have a brand new heart valve that will make her feel much better." As they wheeled Sarah toward the operating room, she reached out and squeezed Richard's hand. "Take care of our miracle," she whispered. Emma waved until her mother disappeared around the corner, then turned to Richard with determined eyes. "Now we wait, and now we work. Mr. Marcus, can you help Daddy try to stand up?" Marcus looked at Richard questioningly. Richard took a deep breath, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years. Genuine hope mixed with desperate love for the two people who needed him most. "Let's try," he said quietly. The physical therapy room on the hospital's rehabilitation floor was empty except for Richard, Emma, and Marcus. Richard's hands gripped the parallel bars so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool temperature. "Remember," Marcus said quietly, "we're not looking for miracles today. We're just looking for any sensation, any response at all." Emma sat cross-legged on a nearby mat, her hands clasped together. "I'm praying real hard, Daddy. I can feel it working." Richard closed his eyes, concentrating with every fiber of his being. For 3 years, he'd gone through the motions of physical therapy with resigned desperation. Today felt different. Today, he wasn't just trying to walk for himself. He was trying to walk for his daughter. For the woman fighting for her life 3 floors above them. "Focus on your left leg first," Marcus instructed. "Don't try to move it, just try to feel it." For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, something extraordinary occurred. Richard felt a tiny tingling sensation in his left thigh. His eyes snapped open. "Marcus," he whispered urgently, "I felt something." "Where?" "My left leg. It was like pins and needles." Marcus knelt down and gently pressed against Richard's thigh muscle. "Can you feel this?" Richard concentrated intensely. "Yes. Faint, but yes." Emma jumped up excitedly. "It's working. I knew it would work." "Easy, sweetheart," Marcus cautioned, though his own voice was filled with amazement. "This is just the beginning. Richard, try to focus on sending a signal down to your leg. Don't worry about movement yet. Just try to activate the muscle." Richard gripped the bars and concentrated harder than he'd ever concentrated on anything in his life. He thought about Emma's trusting eyes, about Sarah fighting for her life upstairs, about all the moments he'd missed and all the moments he hoped to have. Suddenly, his left quadriceps muscle contracted slightly. Marcus gasped. "Richard, do that again." "Did I do something?" "Your quad muscle just fired. It was small, but it definitely fired." For the next hour, they worked methodically. Richard managed to activate several muscle groups in both legs, not enough for movement, but enough to prove that some neural pathways were still intact. By the end of the session, he was exhausted, but exhilarated. "This is incredible," Marcus said, reviewing his notes. "In 3 years, we've never had responses like this. It's like something has awakened your nervous system." Emma climbed onto Richard's lap as he sat in his wheelchair, catching his breath. "I told you, Daddy, love makes miracles happen." A nurse appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Whitmore, Dr. Williams would like to see you. The surgery is complete." Richard's heart stopped. "Is she?" "You'll need to speak with the doctor," the nurse said diplomatically. The elevator ride to the cardiac floor felt like an eternity. Emma held Richard's hand tightly, her small fingers interlaced with his much larger ones. When they reached the waiting area, Dr. Williams was standing there with an expression Richard couldn't read. "How is she?" Richard asked, before the doctor could speak. Dr. Williams smiled, the first genuine smile Richard had seen from her. "The surgery was a complete success. Sarah is going to be fine. Better than fine, actually. Once she recovers, she'll have better heart function than she's had in years." Emma let out a whoop of joy that echoed through the hallway. "When can we see her?" Richard asked. "She's just waking up now. But I should warn you, she'll be groggy and disoriented for a while." They made their way to Sarah's room, where she was indeed awake, but clearly struggling with the effects of anesthesia. When she saw Richard and Emma, however, Her eyes cleared immediately. "How did it go?" she asked weakly. "Perfect," Dr. Williams assured her. "You're going to feel like a new person in a few weeks." Emma climbed carefully onto the bed beside her mother. "Guess what?" "Mama, Daddy's legs are starting to work again. The doctor saw it happen." Sarah's eyes widened as she looked at Richard. "Is that true?" "It's early," Richard said cautiously. "But yes, for the first time in 3 years I had genuine muscle response." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Emma, you said this would happen." "I told you," Emma said matter-of-factly. "God was just waiting for the right time. When Daddy found out he had people who needed him to be strong, that's when the miracle could happen." But as they celebrated this moment of triumph, none of them noticed the figure standing in the hallway outside Sarah's room. A woman in an expensive suit, holding a legal document and watching the family reunion with cold, calculating eyes. Margaret Whitmore's perfectly manicured nails drummed against the leather portfolio in her hands as she observed the touching family scene through the hospital room window. At 62, Richard's stepmother had spent 15 years building her influence within Whitmore Industries, positioning herself as the power behind the throne during Richard's darkest moments. The sight of Richard laughing with a woman and child threatened everything she'd worked for. "Mrs. Whitmore?" Her assistant, Peter Dalton, approached quietly. "I've completed the background check you requested." Margaret stepped away from the window, her heels clicking sharply against the hospital floor. "Tell me." "Sarah Collins, age 34, single mother, works 3 cleaning jobs to make ends meet. No criminal record, no debt except medical bills. The child, Emma Collins, age 9, born approximately 10 months after Richard's last known contact with the mother. DNA test. None on record, but the timing and physical resemblance are compelling." Margaret's jaw tightened. When Richard's father died 5 years ago, he'd left her a substantial fortune. But the controlling interest in Whitmore Industries had gone to Richard. She'd been patient, waiting for the right moment to gain complete control. Richard's depression and withdrawal had been perfect for her plans. Now this. "What else?" she demanded. "I've been tracking the hospital communications. Richard has authorized a heart surgery that cost nearly $200,000. He's also been making phone calls about experimental spinal cord treatments." Margaret felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. A Richard with hope was dangerous. A Richard with a family to fight for was devastating to her ambitions. "There's more," Peter continued. "The physical therapist has been calling in favors with neurological specialists. Word is spreading about Richard's sudden improvement." "Improvement?" Margaret's voice was ice cold. "According to my source in the hospital, Richard showed significant muscle response during therapy today, after 3 years of no progress." Margaret stared through the window again, watching Emma cuddle against her father, while Sarah smiled weakly from her hospital bed. Such a perfect little family picture, such an enormous threat to everything she'd planned. "Peter, I want you to research every angle of this situation. Employment records, medical histories, financial situations, everything. And I want to know about any legal vulnerabilities." "Ma'am, Richard has never been married. He's never acknowledged this child. From a legal standpoint, what are his obligations?" Peter's expression grew uncomfortable. "Ma'am, are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting we need to understand all our options." Margaret's smile was sharp as a blade. "Richard is clearly not thinking clearly. He's making impulsive financial decisions, authorizing expensive treatments without board approval. One might argue that his judgment is compromised." Inside the hospital room, Emma suddenly looked toward the window, her bright green eyes seeming to look directly at Margaret. For a moment, the little girl's expression was unnaturally serious, as if she could sense the threat lurking just outside their newfound happiness. "Daddy," Emma said quietly. not breaking eye contact with the window. I think someone doesn't want our family to be together. Richard followed her gaze, but Margaret had already stepped out of view. What do you mean, sweetheart? He asked. I don't know, just a feeling. Emma snuggled closer to him. But don't worry. As long as we stick together, the bad feelings can't hurt us. In the hallway, Margaret made her decision. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number she'd hoped never to use. Hello, Jonathan. It's Margaret Whitmore. I need to discuss Richard's mental competency and his recent erratic behavior. Yes, I'm talking about a formal evaluation. Can you be in Chicago tomorrow? As she hung up, Margaret smiled coldly. If Richard wanted to play at being a family man, she'd remind him exactly what he stood to lose, not just his legs, but everything he'd built, everything his father had built. The war for Whitmore Industries was about to begin, and Margaret intended to win, no matter what collateral damage occurred to one little girl's dreams of having a father. Dr. Jonathan Winters adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses as he reviewed the psychiatric evaluation request in Margaret Whitmore's downtown Chicago office. The leather-bound law books and mahogany furnishings spoke of old money and older power. You're asking me to declare Richard mentally incompetent based on what, exactly? Dr. Winters asked. His voice carefully neutral. Margaret paced behind her desk like a caged predator. Erratic financial decisions, emotional instability, and delusional thinking. He's authorized hundreds of thousands in medical expenses for strangers, Jonathan. He's convinced a child can perform miracles. The financial decisions could be seen as charitable. And from what I understand, the child isn't exactly a stranger. An unverified paternity claim from a woman who disappeared for 10 years. Margaret's voice dripped disdain. Richard is vulnerable, grieving, and making decisions that could destroy everything his father built. Dr. Winters set down the file. Margaret, I've known you for 20 years. What's really going on here? Margaret stopped pacing and fixed him with a steely stare. Richard owns 60% of Whitmore Industries. If something happens to him, those shares go to his next of kin. If this little girl is really his daughter. Ah, Dr. Winters leaned back in his chair. Now I understand. I've dedicated my life to that company. I won't watch it destroyed by a gold-digging single mother and her child. Margaret's mask slipped, revealing the desperation beneath her composed exterior. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Richard was experiencing something unprecedented. For the first time in 3 years, he was standing upright, supported by parallel bars, but bearing some of his own weight. Emma sat nearby, coloring in a notebook while providing a constant stream of encouragement. "Look, Daddy, you're standing like a real daddy," Emma exclaimed, her crayon creating bold streaks of yellow across the paper. Marcus watched in amazement as Richard took a trembling half-step forward. "This is incredible, Richard. Your muscle response has improved exponentially in just 4 days." "It doesn't feel real," Richard admitted, sweat streaming down his face from the effort. "After 3 years of nothing, and now you have something to fight for," Sarah said from her wheelchair. She'd been discharged from cardiac care, but was still recovering, and she insisted on watching Richard's therapy sessions. "Mr. Whitmore," a young man in a cheap suit appeared in the doorway. "I'm process server David Chen. You're being served with a legal petition." Richard's blood ran cold as he accepted the papers. "Petition for mental competency evaluation," he read aloud. "Filed by Margaret Whitmore on behalf of concerned shareholders." Sarah gasped. "Can she do that?" "Unfortunately, yes," Richard said grimly, sinking back into his wheelchair. "If the court agrees, I'm not mentally competent. Margaret could gain control of my medical decisions, my finances, even my parental rights." Emma looked up from her coloring, her young face creased with worry. "What does that mean, Daddy?" Richard forced a smile he didn't feel. It means we have some grown-up problems to solve, sweetheart, but don't worry, everything's going to be okay. But even as he said the words, Richard wondered if he was lying to his daughter and to himself. The court-appointed psychiatrist's office felt like a tomb. Dr. Helena Rodriguez had been evaluating mental competency cases for 15 years, and she approached each one with clinical detachment. Richard sat across from her, acutely aware that his entire future hung on this conversation. "Mr. Whitmore, can you explain to me your recent financial expenditures?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, consulting her notes. "I paid for necessary medical care for my daughter's mother. Sarah needed heart surgery that she couldn't afford. And you authorized this expense without consulting your board of directors or financial advisors." Richard bristled. It was a medical emergency. Sarah was dying. Yet you'd had no contact with this woman for 10 years. Some might call that impulsive. Some might call it taking responsibility for my actions. Richard leaned forward. "Doctor, I discovered I have a daughter. What was I supposed to do? Let her mother die?" Dr. Rodriguez made notes on her tablet. "Tell me about your belief that this child can help you walk again." Richard chose his words carefully. "Emma has given me hope and motivation I didn't have before. My physical therapy progress has been remarkable since she entered my life. But do you believe she has supernatural healing powers? I believe love can accomplish things that medicine alone cannot. Whether you call that supernatural or psychological doesn't matter to me. For the next 2 hours, Dr. Rodriguez probed every aspect of Richard's decision-making, his relationship with Emma, and his business judgment. When the session finally ended, Richard felt drained and uncertain. "When will you make your recommendation?" he asked. "I'll have my report to the court within 48 hours, Dr. Rodriguez replied neutrally. That evening, Richard sat in Sarah's hospital room while Emma slept curled up in the chair beside her mother's bed. Sarah was recovering well, but the stress of the legal proceedings was taking its toll on everyone. "What if we lose?" Sarah whispered, not wanting to wake Emma. "We won't," Richard said with more confidence than he felt. "But if we do, Margaret could get control of your affairs. She could separate us." Richard reached for Sarah's hand. "That's not going to happen. I won't let it." "Richard, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you years ago." Sarah's voice was barely audible. "What is it?" "The night before I left. 10 years ago. I tried to tell you I was pregnant, but you were on that important phone call about the Peterson merger, and you held up your hand to stop me from talking." Richard's heart sank. "Sarah, I stood there for 20 minutes, waiting for you to hang up. When you finally did, you said you were too exhausted to talk and asked if we could discuss whatever it was in the morning. But I was so hurt, so angry, that I left that night instead." The weight of that revelation hit Richard like a physical blow. If I had listened, we would have been a family from the beginning. Emma would have grown up with her father. I wouldn't have struggled alone for 10 years. Tears streamed down Sarah's face, and maybe Margaret wouldn't be able to use our situation against you now. Richard squeezed her hand tighter. "We can't change the past, Sarah. But I promise you, I will not let anyone take our family away from us now." Unknown to them, Margaret was at that moment meeting with her lawyer, reviewing strategies to ensure that her petition would succeed. "The key," her attorney explained, "is to paint Richard as emotionally unstable and financially reckless, a man who makes major decisions based on the delusions of a child. And if the psychiatrist doesn't find him incompetent?" The lawyer smiled coldly. "Then we move to Plan B. Sometimes the most effective legal strategy isn't what happens in court. It's what happens outside of it." Emma's laughter echoed through the hospital's physical therapy room as Richard took 3 consecutive steps without support. It was his best performance yet, and for a moment, the legal clouds hanging over their family seemed to part. "Daddy, you're doing it! You're really walking!" Emma clapped her hands together, bouncing on her toes with excitement. Marcus couldn't hide his amazement. "Richard, this is beyond remarkable. I've never seen recovery like this. Never." "How do you feel?" Sarah asked from her wheelchair. She was strong enough now to spend most of the day out of bed, though she still tired easily. "Like I'm dreaming," Richard admitted, gripping the parallel bars for support. "Every step feels impossible, but also inevitable." "That's because you're supposed to walk, Daddy," Emma said matter-of-factly. "God just needed you to remember why." Dr. Williams appeared in the doorway, holding a tablet with test results. "Mr. Whitmore, I have your latest neurological scans." Richard's euphoria dimmed. "What do they show?" "Honestly, they're confusing the entire neurology department. The damage to your spinal cord is still there. The original injury hasn't changed, but somehow your nervous system is finding new pathways, creating connections that shouldn't be possible." Marcus stepped forward. "What are you saying, Doctor?" "I'm saying that medically, Richard shouldn't be able to do what he's doing. His improvement defies everything we know about spinal cord injuries." Dr. Williams looked at Emma with curiosity. "Unless there are factors we don't understand." Emma tilted her head, studying the doctor with those unnaturally wise green eyes. "Some things can't be measured by machines, Dr. Williams. Some things you have to feel with your heart." Before Dr. Williams could respond, Richard's lawyer, James Morrison, burst into the room. His expression was grim. "Richard, we have a problem. Dr. Rodriguez filed her report an hour ago." Richard felt his stomach drop. "And?" "She's recommending a full competency hearing. The court has scheduled it for Monday, 3 days from now." Sarah paled. "What does that mean?" "It means Margaret gets a chance to prove Richard is mentally unfit. If she succeeds, she'll gain conservatorship over his medical decisions, financial affairs, and potentially his parental rights." Emma looked up at her father with frightened eyes. "Does that mean the mean lady can take you away from us?" Richard knelt down to Emma's level, ignoring the strain on his recovering legs. "Emma, I want you to listen to me very carefully. No matter what happens in that courtroom, you are my daughter, and I love you. Nothing and no one will ever change that. But what if? No what if, sweetheart. We're going to fight this, and we're going to win." James Morrison cleared his throat. "Richard, there's more. Margaret's legal team has been digging into Sarah's background. They're going to argue that she's a gold digger who coached Emma to manipulate you." "That's ridiculous," Sarah protested. "Maybe, but it's a compelling narrative. Struggling single mother, wealthy businessman overcome with guilt, a child who claims she can perform miracles. They're painting it as an elaborate con game." Richard felt rage building in his chest. "Margaret doesn't know anything about our family. She knows enough to be dangerous. Richard, I have to ask, do you have any proof that Emma is your daughter? DNA test, birth certificate listing you as the father?" "The birth certificate lists father as unknown," Sarah admitted quietly. "I was protecting Richard's reputation. I never imagined." "Then we need a DNA test immediately. It's the only way to legally establish paternity." Emma tugged on Richard's sleeve. "Daddy, what's a DNA test?" "It's just a simple test to prove you're my daughter, sweetheart." "But we already know I'm your daughter. You don't need a test to know you love someone." Richard hugged her tightly. "You're absolutely right, Emma. But sometimes grown-ups need proof of things that should be obvious." As the family discussed their legal strategy, none of them noticed the maintenance worker changing light bulbs in the hallway outside. The worker wore coveralls and kept his head down. But if anyone had looked closely, they would have recognized Peter Dalton, Margaret's assistant, carefully recording their conversation through the partially open door. Margaret was about to play her ace in the hole, and she was confident it would destroy Richard's newfound happiness once and for all. The DNA test results arrived on Friday morning, 2 days before the competency hearing. Richard tore open the envelope with trembling hands, while Sarah and Emma waited anxiously in the hospital cafeteria. 99.9% probability of paternity, Richard read aloud, his voice thick with emotion. Emma, you are officially, legally, completely my daughter. Emma grinned widely. I told you so, Daddy. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. Now Margaret can't claim Emma isn't yours. This changes everything, James Morrison said. Reviewing the document, Margaret's entire case was built on questioning your judgment about accepting responsibility for a child who might not be yours. With proven paternity, your actions become completely reasonable. Richard felt hope blooming in his chest for the first time since the legal proceedings began. So we're going to be okay. I think we have a very strong case, James replied, but their celebration was short-lived. Peter Dalton approached their table with a neutral expression, carrying a manila envelope. Mr. Whitmore, I have some documents you need to see. Richard frowned. I'm sorry. Who are you? Peter Dalton, Mrs. Margaret Whitmore's executive assistant. She wanted you to have these before Monday's hearing. Richard accepted the envelope warily. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Pictures of Sarah entering and leaving various buildings around Chicago, pictures of Emma at school, pictures of their family meetings in the hospital. She's been having us followed, Sarah whispered, her face pale. But the photographs weren't the worst part. Attached to them was a detailed financial report showing every penny Sarah had earned over the past 10 years, every bill she'd struggled to pay, every hardship she'd endured, and at the bottom, a typed note. Sarah Collins has accumulated $47,000 in debt over the past 3 years. Her cleaning jobs pay minimum wage. Her daughter attends a school in one of Chicago's poorest districts. Convenient timing for her to remember to tell Mr. Whitmore about his daughter. Emma looked up from the photographs with tears in her eyes. Daddy, why is the mean lady taking pictures of us? Richard's hands shook with rage. Peter, you can tell Margaret that if she thinks this intimidates me, she's wrong. Actually, sir, there's more. Peter's expression was almost apologetic. Mrs. Whitmore has filed an additional petition with the court. She's requesting temporary custody of Emma during the competency evaluation. Sarah gasped. She can't do that. She's arguing that Emma is being used as a pawn in an elaborate manipulation scheme, and that her welfare is at risk. The court has scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow. Richard felt the world spinning around him. In less than 24 hours, Margaret could take Emma away from him before he even had a chance to fight for his own freedom. There's one more thing, Peter continued, and his voice carried genuine regret. Mrs. Whitmore wanted me to convey a message. She says if you voluntarily sign over 51% of Whitmore Industries to her, she'll withdraw all legal proceedings and leave your family alone. The ultimatum hung in the air like a death sentence. Give up the company his father had built, or lose his daughter and potentially his freedom. Emma slipped her small hand into Richard's much larger one. Daddy, whatever the mean lady wants, don't give it to her. We'll figure out another way. Richard looked down at his daughter, his brave, beautiful, miraculous daughter, and felt something crystallize inside him. Margaret thought she could use his love for Emma against him. She thought she could force him to choose between his family and his company. She was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. Peter, Richard said quietly, his voice carrying a dangerous edge, you tell Margaret that I said this. She can go to hell. I'm not giving up anything. Not my daughter, not my company, and definitely not my family. As Peter walked away, Richard realized that the real battle was just beginning. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt truly ready to fight, because he wasn't fighting just for himself anymore. He was fighting for everything that mattered. Judge Patricia Hawthorne's courtroom felt arctic despite the Chicago summer heat outside. Richard sat at the defendant's table, his wheelchair positioned where everyone could see it, while Emma clung to Sarah's hand in the gallery behind him. The emergency custody hearing would determine Emma's immediate future. Margaret's attorney, Robert Sterling, was a shark in an expensive suit. He stood before the judge with practiced confidence, holding a thick file of evidence. "Your Honor," Sterling began, "we're dealing with a vulnerable child who has been coached to manipulate a wealthy man during his time of psychological crisis. The defendant has shown severely impaired judgment, authorizing hundreds of thousands in medical expenses for virtual strangers based on the unsubstantiated claims of a 9-year-old girl." Judge Hawthorne looked stern and unmoved. "Mr. Sterling, are you arguing that Mr. Whitmore's daughter is a stranger to him?" "We're arguing that there's no proof this child is his daughter beyond a hastily arranged DNA test. The timing is suspicious. A woman disappears for 10 years, only to reappear when her financial situation becomes desperate." Richard's lawyer, James Morrison, stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. The DNA test is conclusive scientific evidence." "Overruled. Continue, Mr. Sterling." Sterling smiled coldly. "Furthermore, Your Honor, the child herself claims to possess supernatural healing powers. Mr. Whitmore has been convinced that this little girl can cure his paralysis through prayer and wishful thinking. This represents a dangerous disconnect from reality." In the gallery, Emma whispered to Sarah, "Mama, what's he talking about? I never said I had magic powers." Sarah squeezed her hand. "I know, sweetheart. The lawyers are just confused." Judge Hawthorne called Emma to the stand. As the 9-year-old walked forward, the entire courtroom fell silent. She looked impossibly small in the witness chair, but her green eyes were clear and unafraid. "Emma," Judge Hawthorne said gently, "can you tell me in your own words why you think Mr. Whitmore is your father?" "Because Mama told me he was, and because when I look at him, I feel it in my heart, and because he has the same eyes as me, and he loves me, and I love him." "Did your mother tell you to say specific things to Mr. Whitmore?" "She told me to tell him who I was, and to tell him about the special thing." Sterling leaned forward. "What special thing, Emma?" Emma looked directly at him with those unsettling, wise eyes. "That love makes miracles happen. That when someone believes real hard and loves real deep, God helps fix what's broken. And you believe you can make people walk again." "I believe God can do anything. I just pray really hard for Daddy to get better." "And he's getting better, but I'm not magic. I'm just his little girl." Sterling pressed harder. "Emma, did your mother tell you that if you convinced Mr. Whitmore you could heal him, he would give you money?" Emma's eyes flashed with an anger that seemed far too mature for her years. "My mama never asked for any money. She just wanted Daddy to know about me before." "Before? Before what, Emma?" Emma's voice became very small. "Before she died. The doctors said she might die if her heart didn't get fixed. I just wanted to meet my daddy before I didn't have a mama anymore." The courtroom was dead silent. Several jurors wiped their eyes. Sterling, realizing his attack had backfired, changed tactics. "Your Honor, regardless of the emotional appeal, the fact remains that Mr. Whitmore is making major life decisions based on the influence of a child. This demonstrates compromised judgment that puts both his business interests and the child's welfare at risk." Judge Hawthorne looked thoughtful. "Mr. Morrison, does your client wish to make a statement?" James Morrison nodded, and Richard wheeled himself forward. For a moment, he sat silently, gathering his thoughts. Then he began to speak, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "Your Honor, 3 weeks ago I was a broken man. I'd lost the use of my legs, lost hope, lost any sense of purpose. I was going through the motions of living without actually being alive." Richard's eyes found Emma in the gallery. Then my daughter walked into my life, not because her mother coached her to manipulate me, but because a little girl wanted to meet her father before her mother died. And yes, Emma believes that love can create miracles. Maybe that's naive, maybe that's just the faith of a child, but you know what? She was right. Richard gripped the arms of his wheelchair and with tremendous effort rose to his feet. Gasps echoed through the courtroom as he stood upright, trembling but undeniably standing. "I'm not walking because of some supernatural healing power," Richard continued, his voice growing stronger. "I'm walking because for the first time in 3 years, I have something worth walking for. Someone who needs me to be strong. Someone who believes in me when I couldn't believe in myself." He looked directly at Judge Hawthorne. "Your Honor, I've made some impulsive financial decisions lately. I paid for my daughter's mother to have life-saving surgery. I authorized experimental treatments to help me recover. If caring for my family makes me mentally incompetent, then I guess I'm guilty as charged." Richard slowly lowered himself back into his wheelchair. Exhausted, but triumphant. Judge Hawthorne was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. "Emergency custody petition denied. Emma Collins will remain with her mother and father pending the resolution of the competency hearing. Court adjourned." As the gavel fell, Emma broke free from Sarah's grip and ran to Richard, throwing her arms around his neck. "Daddy, you stood up in front of everyone." "I had to, sweetheart. I had to show them that miracles are real." But as they celebrated their victory, Margaret sat in the back of the courtroom, her face twisted with rage. If she couldn't separate Richard from his daughter through the courts, she'd find another way. And she'd make sure that this time there would be no miraculous recovery. The morning of the competency hearing dawned grey and ominous over Chicago. Richard sat in his wheelchair in the hotel suite he'd rented near the courthouse, watching Emma sleep peacefully on the couch while Sarah brushed her hair in the bathroom mirror. 3 weeks had passed since that first miraculous day when his daughter had walked into his life, and now everything hung in the balance. "Daddy?" Emma's sleepy voice interrupted his thoughts. "Are you scared about today?" Richard wheeled over to the couch and smoothed her rumpled hair. "A little, sweetheart. But not for the reasons you might think." "What do you mean?" "I'm not scared of losing the court case. I'm scared of what winning might cost us." Richard's voice was heavy with the weight of decisions he'd been grappling with all night. "Emma, there's something you need to understand. Fighting Margaret isn't just about proving I'm competent. It's about protecting our family from someone who will never stop trying to hurt us." Emma sat up, suddenly fully awake. "The mean lady is going to keep being mean. People like Margaret don't give up easily. Even if we win today, she'll find other ways to try to take what she wants." Richard paused, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes, to protect the people you love, you have to make sacrifices." Sarah emerged from the bathroom, her expression tense. "Richard, what are you thinking?" Before he could answer, his phone rang. James Morrison's name appeared on the screen, and Richard answered immediately. "James, please tell me you have good news." "Richard, we have a problem. Margaret's team filed an emergency motion this morning. They're claiming you threatened Peter Dalton yesterday." "That's ridiculous. I never—" "They have a recording, Richard. Apparently, when you told Peter that Margaret could go to hell, it was captured on his phone. They're arguing it demonstrates aggressive behavior and mental instability." Richard felt his heart sink. "Can they use that?" "They're going to try. Judge Hawthorne is reviewing it now. Richard, I have to ask, are you prepared for the possibility that we might lose?" The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Richard looked at Emma, who was watching him with those trusting green eyes, and at Sarah, whose hand instinctively went to her chest, where her new heart valve was already giving her more energy than she'd had in years. "James, if we lose today, what exactly happens?" "Margaret becomes your conservator. She makes all decisions about your medical care, your finances, and potentially your living arrangements. She could separate you from Emma and Sarah. For how long? Indefinitely, until another court rules you competent, which she would fight. Richard closed his eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choices. And if I don't fight? If I voluntarily sign over control of the company? Then you keep your family, but you lose everything else. Your father's legacy, your employees' livelihoods, your ability to help people like Sarah in the future. After hanging up, Richard sat in silence for several minutes. Emma climbed into his lap, something that had become as natural as breathing over the past weeks. "Daddy, what's wrong?" "Emma, do you remember what you told me that first day? About love making miracles happen?" "Uh-huh. I need to know something. When you pray for me, what exactly do you pray for?" Emma's face grew serious with the gravity children bring to important questions. "I pray for God to help you be the daddy you're supposed to be, not just to me and Mama, but to everyone who needs you." The simplicity and wisdom of her answer hit Richard like a lightning bolt. "What do you mean, everyone who needs me?" "Well, you help people, right? Like you helped Mama get better. And Mr. Marcus told me you have lots of people who work for you who depend on you to be smart and good, and the mean lady wants to hurt all of them, not just us." Richard stared at his daughter in amazement. This 9-year-old child had grasped something that had taken him weeks to understand. The fight wasn't just about their family, it was about everyone Margaret would hurt in her quest for power. "Emma, what if fighting the mean lady means we might lose? What if trying to help everyone else puts our family at risk?" Emma was quiet for a long moment, her brow furrowed in concentration. Finally, she looked up at him with absolute clarity. "Daddy, you taught me something important, even though you didn't mean to." "What's that?" "You taught me that when someone you love is in trouble, you don't worry about money or danger or being scared. You just help them, like when you helped Mama, even though you barely knew me yet." Richard felt tears building in his eyes. "That's different, sweetheart. That was medical care. This is the same thing," Emma interrupted with startling firmness. "All those people who work for you, they're like family too. And if the mean lady hurts them, that's like letting Mama stay sick when you could have helped her." Sarah sat down beside them, her own eyes glistening. "Richard, she's right. We can't build our happiness on other people's suffering. But what if—" "No what ifs," Emma said, echoing the words he'd spoken to her days earlier. "We fight for everyone, not just us. That's what families do." Richard hugged his daughter tightly, marveling at how a child's faith could provide such clarity. "Okay, Emma, we fight." 2 hours later, they sat in Judge Hawthorne's courtroom as Margaret's attorney presented their case. Robert Sterling painted Richard as an unstable man, making irrational decisions based on the delusions of a child, backed by carefully edited recordings and financial documents that made his generosity look like reckless spending. "Your Honor," Sterling concluded, "Mr. Whitmore has demonstrated a pattern of erratic behavior that endangers not only his own welfare, but the welfare of his alleged daughter and the thousands of employees who depend on Whitmore Industries. Mrs. Margaret Whitmore has successfully managed the company's day-to-day operations for the past 3 years during Mr. Whitmore's incapacitation. She is clearly the most qualified person to continue in that role." When James Morrison stood to present Richard's defense, he was thorough and passionate, but Richard could see doubt in the judge's eyes. The prosecution's case was compelling, and the evidence was damaging. "Your Honor," James concluded, "Richard Whitmore has shown remarkable improvement in both his physical condition and his emotional well-being since reconnecting with his daughter. His decisions, while generous, have been entirely rational when viewed in context. He paid for life-saving medical care for his daughter's mother and invested in experimental treatments that have yielded unprecedented results. These are the actions of a loving father and a man determined to regain his independence, not the actions of someone mentally incompetent. Judge Hawthorne called for a recess to review the evidence. As the courtroom emptied, Margaret approached Richard's table with a triumphant smile. "Richard, it's not too late," she said quietly. "Sign over the company, and this all goes away. You keep your little family, and everyone's happy." Richard looked up at her with steady eyes. "Margaret, I've spent 3 years thinking I'd lost everything that mattered. I was wrong. I hadn't lost everything. I just hadn't found it yet." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means I'm not afraid of you anymore. Whatever happens here today, I know who I am now. I'm Emma's father, Sarah's partner, and the rightful head of Whitmore Industries. And I'm going to fight for all of it." Margaret's mask of composure slipped, revealing the fury beneath. "You self-righteous fool. You have no idea what I'm capable of." "Actually, I do." Richard's voice was quiet, but firm. "You're capable of destroying everything my father built out of greed and spite. You're capable of hurting innocent people to get what you want, but you know what you're not capable of." "What?" "You're not capable of love. Real love. The kind that builds instead of destroys, that protects instead of exploits." Richard glanced toward Emma, who was coloring quietly in the front row. "And that's why you're going to lose." When court reconvened, Judge Hawthorne looked grave. "This is one of the most complex competency cases I've reviewed. The evidence presents a man who has certainly made some impulsive financial decisions, but also a man who has shown remarkable improvement in his condition and judgment." Richard felt his heart hammering as the judge continued. "However, I am troubled by the aggressive language captured in the recording and by the speed with which major financial commitments were made without proper consultation." Margaret smiled coldly from across the aisle. "Therefore," Judge Hawthorne continued, "I am ordering a comprehensive psychological evaluation to be conducted over the next 30 days, during which time—" "Your Honor," Richard interrupted, rising from his wheelchair with obvious effort. "May I address the court?" "Mr. Whitmore, you should be seated." "Your Honor, I've been seated for 3 years. I'd prefer to stand for this." Judge Hawthorne looked surprised but nodded. "Very well." Richard took a deep breath, gripping the rail in front of him for support. "Your Honor, I want to tell you about miracles. Mr. Whitmore, 3 weeks ago, I was a broken man who had given up on life. I couldn't walk, couldn't find purpose, couldn't even imagine a future worth living. The doctor said I would never recover. The experts said my condition was permanent. Everyone, including me, believed that some things were simply impossible." Richard's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Then my daughter walked into my life, not because she had magic powers or supernatural abilities, but because she had something more powerful than either of those things. She had faith, faith that love could accomplish what medicine couldn't, faith that families could overcome any obstacle, faith that her father was someone worth believing in." He gestured toward Emma, who was watching him with radiant pride. "Your Honor, that little girl taught me that miracles aren't supernatural events that defy the laws of nature. Miracles are what happen when people who love each other refuse to give up, refuse to surrender, refuse to accept that some battles can't be won." Richard took a step away from the rail, then another, walking slowly but steadily across the courtroom. "I'm not walking because Emma waved a magic wand. I'm walking because she gave me a reason to fight. She gave me a purpose bigger than my own pain. She reminded me that I have responsibilities, to her, to her mother, to the thousands of people who work for my company, and to the memory of my father who built something worth preserving." The courtroom was dead silent, except for the soft sound of Richard's footsteps as he moved closer to the judge's bench. "Your Honor, Margaret Whitmore claims I'm mentally incompetent because I made impulsive decisions to help my family. She says I'm unfit to run my company because I prioritized love over profit margins. She argues that I'm dangerous because I believe a child's faith can inspire miracles. Richard stopped directly in front of the judge, standing without support, his voice ringing with conviction. I plead guilty to all of those charges. I am guilty of putting family before business. I am guilty of believing that love is more powerful than fear. I'm guilty of having faith in miracles. And if those things make me incompetent in the eyes of the law, then I accept that judgment. Richard turned to face Margaret, his eyes blazing with righteous anger. But I will never allow someone motivated by greed and spite to destroy what my father built, or to hurt the people I love. If this court rules against me, I will appeal. If that appeal fails, I will find another way, because that's what fathers do, Margaret. That's what real leaders do. They fight for the people who depend on them, no matter the cost. Richard walked back to his table, each step more confident than the last. As he lowered himself into his wheelchair, Emma jumped up and ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. "Daddy, that was the most walking you've ever done." "That's because I wasn't walking for me, sweetheart. I was walking for us, for all of us." Judge Hawthorne had tears in her eyes as she spoke. "Mr. Whitmore, I have seen many things in my courtroom over the years, but I have never seen anything quite like what just happened here." She turned to face the gallery, where dozens of Whitmore Industries employees had gathered to support their boss. Love, faith, and determination are not symptoms of mental illness. They are, in fact, signs of the highest form of mental health. Mr. Whitmore has demonstrated not only his competency, but his exceptional character. The judge's gavel rang out like a bell. Petition for conservatorship denied. Richard Whitmore retains full control of his personal and business affairs. Case dismissed. The courtroom erupted in cheers and applause. Emma danced around Richard's wheelchair while Sarah hugged James Morrison. Employees surged forward to congratulate their vindicated leader. But Margaret wasn't finished. As the celebration continued, she slipped out of the courtroom and made a phone call from the hallway. "It's done," she said quietly into her phone. "Initiate the backup plan. I want the building evacuated and the files destroyed within the hour." "Ma'am, are you sure this is a federal crime? Richard Whitmore just humiliated me in front of half of Chicago. If I can't have the company, no one can." Back in the courtroom, Richard was accepting congratulations when his phone buzzed with an emergency alert. "Fire alarm! Whitmore Industries building, all personnel evacuate immediately." The blood drained from Richard's face as he read the message aloud. "There's a fire at our headquarters." James Morrison was already on his phone with emergency services. "Richard, the fire department is responding, but early reports suggest it might be arson." The fire started simultaneously on multiple floors. Richard looked around the courtroom, but Margaret was nowhere to be seen. A chill ran down his spine as the implications became clear. "She wouldn't," Sarah whispered. "She would," Richard replied grimly. "If she can't control the company, she'll destroy it rather than let me have it." Emma tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, we have to go help." "Emma, it's not safe." "Not to fight the fire, Daddy. To save the people." Richard looked down at his daughter, seeing once again the wisdom that never ceased to amaze him. "You're right, sweetheart. Let's go." The ride to Whitmore Industries took 20 minutes through Chicago traffic. When they arrived, the building was surrounded by fire trucks and ambulances. Thick black smoke poured from the upper floors, and Richard could see the orange glow of flames through several windows. Fire Chief Rodriguez approached Richard's car as they pulled up. "Mr. Whitmore, we've evacuated most of the building, but we have a problem." "What is it?" "There are still people trapped on the 38th floor. The elevators are down, and the stairwells are filled with smoke. Our ladder trucks can't reach that high." Richard felt his heart stop. "How many people?" 12 employees who were working late on the quarterly reports. "They're in the conference room on the east side of the building." Without hesitation, Richard began transferring from his wheelchair to the driver's seat of his car. "Richard, what are you doing?" Sarah asked. "I know this building better than anyone. There's a service elevator that runs on an independent power system. If I can reach the electrical panel on the 20th floor and reroute the power, I can get that elevator working. You can't walk 38 flights of stairs. I don't have to, but I do have to try." Richard looked at Emma through the car window. "Sweetheart, I need you to do something very important for me." "What, Daddy?" "I need you to pray harder than you've ever prayed in your life. Not for a miracle, for strength, for wisdom, for the courage to do what needs to be done." Emma nodded solemnly. "I will, Daddy. I'll pray for all of us." Richard made his way into the building, using a service entrance the firefighters had cleared. The smoke was thick, and the heat was intense, but his knowledge of the building's layout guided him through corridors he'd walked thousands of times. Reaching the 20th floor was agony. His recovering legs screamed with pain, and the smoke made breathing difficult. But every time he wanted to stop, he thought about the 12 people trapped above, counting on him to save them. The electrical panel was exactly where he remembered it. Working by feel in the smoky darkness, Richard rerouted power from the main elevators to the service elevator. The machinery hummed to life, and he felt a surge of hope. The service elevator was slower than the main ones, but it worked. Richard rode it to the 38th floor, where he found the 12 employees huddled in the conference room, terrified but alive. "Mr. Whitmore!" Janet from accounting gasped as he appeared in the doorway. "How did you get here?" "Long story. We need to move fast. The elevator is working, but I don't know for how long." Getting 12 people into the small service elevator required 2 trips. Richard stayed with the second group, making sure everyone else was safe before saving himself. As the elevator descended for the final time, carrying Richard and the last 4 employees, the building's structure began to groan ominously. They reached the ground floor just as a section of the upper floors collapsed in a shower of sparks and debris. Outside, Emma ran to Richard as he emerged from the building, soot-covered and exhausted but triumphant. "Daddy, you saved everyone!" "We saved everyone, sweetheart. Your prayers gave me the strength I needed." Fire Chief Rodriguez approached with an update. "Mr. Whitmore, we found evidence of accelerants on multiple floors. This was definitely arson. We've also arrested Margaret Whitmore trying to leave the city. She had documents showing she'd taken out a substantial insurance policy on the building just last week." Richard nodded wearily. "Chief, what's the damage?" "Upper floors are a total loss, but the lower 30 floors are salvageable. You'll be able to rebuild." As the weeks that followed would prove, rebuilding was exactly what Richard did. Not just the building, but his entire life. Margaret was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for arson and attempted insurance fraud. The investigation revealed she'd been embezzling from the company for years, systematically weakening it while positioning herself to take control. Richard's recovery continued to amaze the medical community. 6 months after Emma first walked into his life, he was walking unassisted and had returned to full-time leadership of Whitmore Industries. The company, rebuilt with a focus on employee welfare and community service, became more successful than ever. Sarah's heart surgery was completely successful. Her health improved so dramatically that she was able to return to school, earning a business degree while helping Richard manage the company's charitable foundation. Emma thrived in her new life, but she never lost her simple faith or her belief in the power of love to create miracles. She kept the small brown paper bag from that first day, now filled with pictures of her family and letters from the employees her father had saved. 1 year later, Richard and Sarah were married in a small ceremony in the garden of their new home. Emma served as both flower girl and ring bearer, declaring it the most perfect wedding ever, because everyone who loves each other got to be together. During his wedding speech, Richard looked out at the assembled friends and family, including many of the employees he'd rescued from the fire, and reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. A year ago, I was a broken man who had given up on everything that mattered. I thought miracles were fairy tales, that love was a luxury I couldn't afford, and that some damage was too great to ever heal. He paused, his eyes finding Emma in the front row, wearing her best dress and beaming with joy. I was wrong about all of it. Miracles are real. They happen every day when people who love each other refuse to give up hope. Love isn't a luxury. It's the most practical, powerful force in the universe. And no damage is so great that it can't be healed when the right people come into your life at the right time. Richard reached out and took Emma's hand as she ran up to join him at the altar. My daughter taught me that faith isn't about believing in the impossible. Faith is about believing that love will find a way, no matter how dark things seem. She taught me that miracles aren't supernatural events. They're what happen when ordinary people do extraordinary things for the people they love. As Richard looked out at the sea of faces before him, Sarah radiant in her wedding dress, Emma glowing with happiness, employees who had become like family, friends who had supported them through the darkest times, he realized that his daughter had been right from the very beginning. Love really did make miracles happen. And sometimes, if you believed hard enough and loved deep enough, those miracles could transform not just one life, but everyone whose life you touched. The little girl in the worn blue dress who had walked into his office building that rainy day had indeed made her daddy walk again. But more than that, she had taught him how to live again, how to love again, and how to believe in the extraordinary power of an ordinary family to overcome anything. As Emma squeezed his hand and whispered, "I love you, Daddy," Richard knew with absolute certainty that no matter what challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. Because that's what families do, and that's where the real miracles begin.